I'm joined now by Tommy Vietor. Tommy, thanks for joining.
What's up, buddy? Good to see you.
How you doing?
You know.
Yeah, that resonates.
You know.
That tracks.
You know.
So we're in this moment of post-election introspection, and there's a lot of people that have a lot of things to say about what Democrats did wrong, what Democrats can do better moving forward. There is also this underlying theme where, the whole world was dealing with high inflation and high prices, and there was pushback amid the whole world to folks who were in office.
Yeah.
And we lost incumbents, we lost majorities in governing parties all across the planet. U.S. was no different. So I'm wondering, to what extent do you think that the Democratic Party needs to look inward and figure out how it needs to move forward, versus to what extent do you think that this was just the result of the economic environment more broadly, and that all of our efforts to upend everything are maybe not so warranted?
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem with like a zero-sum election process, right? I mean, you win, you're a genius. You lose,
Right.
You're a fool, and it could be a margin of a couple thousand votes. I think we'll know better in February when there's better data that comes out and gets released and analyzed. My guess is this was mostly because people were pissed about the pandemic and inflation and broader economic forces, and they were punishing incumbent parties. I do think they were probably kind of Democratic Party specific challenges on the margins that contributed. I think Joe Biden's age contributed in a big way to his standing before he dropped out. I think his decision to run for re-election was an enormous mistake. It kind of set a lot of these trains in motion. But I think you're right. I mean, you don't want to overreact to an election loss, but you also don't want to act like there's no problem and just put your head in the sand. So It's a balance.
Although that's exactly what the Republicans did. And not only that, not only did they not take any steps to fix anything that was wrong, but they actually pretended that the election was stolen when it wasn't. So they just perpetuated disinformation the entire time. And, clearly Democrats aren't willing to do that. But I'm just saying, like, having this strategy where you just pretend nothing's wrong has been proven to work before.
Yeah, I mean, being out of office has benefits. Yeah, should we do just like a stop the steal, maybe charge the Capitol, see what happens?
Hey, we'll have full control of government in 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, the irony of a lot of this is when Barack Obama won twice, the Republicans did this autopsy of what went wrong, and they decided they needed to be less strident in terms of anti-immigration policy, more welcoming as a party, et cetera. And Donald Trump seemed like the absolute antithesis of all of those recommendations. Then he ran, won, obviously lost his re-election bid, but then won again and racked up even bigger vote totals with voters of color, working class voters, et cetera. So sometimes your best attempts at being introspective and really thinking through the challenges and how to address them can get undercut by the reality that these are wave elections.
It's just opting not to address them whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think sometimes there are large forces in the world that dictate the outcomes of these elections, and the pendulum swings one direction, then it'll swing back.
Okay, so with that said now, I do think it's important to take this opportunity to have some introspection, because even if it was 99% the economic environment, I still think that it's good to take these moments to figure out where we can do better. Like you can always do better. Nobody's running a perfect campaign. No political party is perfect, certainly not the Democrats. So what are you thinking about in terms of, I guess, what your priorities would be in terms of seeing the Democrats move forward and implementing some type of change?
I mean, I think a lot of it is going to be messengers and new leaders emerging. We got to get out of our gerontocracy mode. We need to run candidates that are young, that understand the culture, that are vigorous, can get out and debate. And again, I think Joe Biden did a lot of things that were great, especially in domestic policy, but he should never have run for re-election, in my opinion. I think that we as a party need to reckon with the fact that despite the fact that we're running against Donald Trump, a guy who I think pisses into a golden toilet, somehow he took the mantle of the working class
populist champion
guy.
Yeah.
That's a challenge. We clearly didn't do enough to put forward policies that spoke to people and their needs. We didn't do enough during the 4 years of the Biden administration to help people who are struggling, and we need to refocus and rethink that. And then I think a lot of it is going to be, how are we communicating with voters and how are we reaching them? We cannot do another election cycle where we dump $500 million into campaign ads that don't seem to move the needle.
Yeah. You had an interview, you guys at Pod Save America had an interview, I believe it was Favreau who actually conducted the interview with Stephanie Valencia, who deals with Latino voters, and she spoke about how for $350,000, Republicans were able to buy up one of the last remaining neutral radio stations in South Florida. And meanwhile, Democrats set like millions and millions and millions of dollars on fire. This election cycle, we had nearly $1 billion that was spent on ads that would go in one ear and out the other. And so how do you think that Democrats should focus on the media environment at a moment like right now, as opposed to just waiting for, like August or September of an election year to start remembering that the media actually plays a big role in this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to realize we have a brand problem. People don't like the Democratic Party. They don't think it's cool. They don't think it fights for them. It's not a party they want to be a part of. And right now, people feel the opposite about Trump. You see like athletes doing the Trump dance at games. He's sort of like seen as being culturally cool. People are excited about him, and we need to fix that. And I think part of it is going to be figuring out how to talk to people and reach them early and often. Another part of it will be, I think in Washington, people worry too much about inputs and not outputs. Like they spend 2 weeks writing and editing the speech and then 2 minutes thinking about who it gets to,
right,
or who hears the speech. And so, I mean, you can do daytime, MSNBC hits all you want, and I think that's great, but there's like a swath of voters that are never consuming political content.
A swath of voters, if you're talking to the MSNBC crowd, you're basically talking to the same couple 100,000 people. Yeah. That's it. Like, forget about swath of voters. We're missing the vast, vast, vast majority of Americans out there.
Yeah, and a lot of them don't vote at all. They don't care. And so you have to get out of your comfort zone and go find people where they're at. Way too much has been said about like Joe Rogan, whether you go on his show or not. I think the answer is obvious. You go on that show, you go on Barstool Sports, you go on all these networks, if they'll have you on, that are sort of politically adjacent, that talk about culture and sports and Hollywood and music, and try to introduce yourselves to those people.
And so I'm curious because we have a brand problem in terms of being able to reach out to working class Americans and middle class Americans right now who just don't trust the Democrats to be able to do that. And so when you have a party like today's Democratic Party, like Joe Biden's Democratic Party in the first 2 years of his term, where they passed so much. I mean, from American Rescue Plan, Inflation Reduction Act, PACT Act, CHIPS Act, added 16 million jobs, brought the unemployment rate down. They did all of the things, and they did them with a focus on bolstering and protecting the middle class. I mean, automatic airline refunds for cancellations, eliminating junk fees, $35 insulin and inhalers, all that stuff is meant to help a certain segment of the population, not the ultra wealthy, as opposed to what Trump did in his first term, which was just use his political capital for a tax cut for millionaires and billionaires. When you have a party that largely is walking the walk and still it doesn't matter, right? Then how do you move forward in a way that basically says, like, do we have to do more of the stuff that people don't seem to recognize in the first place?
I think a lot of this was luck and timing. Like, Donald Trump got handed an economy that was revved up and going from Barack Obama. Gas was cheap, and that propelled him for 3 years until the pandemic hit. And then Joe Biden took over in a deep, deep hole and had to climb out of it after the pandemic and all the job loss, et cetera. So that's part of it was just like lucky or unlucky.
Yeah.
But the other piece is, yes, we did some big things, passed a highway bill, the CHIPS Act, the IRA, but a lot of that money wasn't spent. Like, most people weren't feeling that money in any way in their own lives. Like, yes, the capping the price of insulin was a big deal for a lot of people, but it's a discrete thing for a subset of the population, whereas everybody was mad about the cost of gas.
Right.
And I think it's going to be there's not ever going to be a quick fix to solving that problem, but I think at times we sounded completely tone deaf about how we talked about it. Remember the big fight over whether inflation was transitory or here to stay? How stupid does that seem in hindsight?
Yeah. How do you think about this? Because, you were in the Obama administration as spokesman for the National Security Council, and I think Obama's administration stood in stark contrast to Trump in that you have the ACA, Obamacare, which ultimately, to today, would afford 50 million more Americans health care. And there was a messaging vacuum that occurred in the Obama administration where something that 10 years later would end up being so significant, so popular, that even in a Republican-controlled Congress, they couldn't get rid of it. And yet, at the time, there was such a messaging vacuum that Republicans were able to brand this thing as death panels, as ushering in death panels where we would decide, politicians would just decide whether grandma or grandpa live or dies. Now, cut to, you have the Trump administration where, Trump could wake up and tie his shoes and they would try to throw a parade on Pennsylvania Avenue for it. I mean, anything he did would be cause for like some giant jubilant celebration within the administration. And we even see Republicans like now former Republican Madison Cawthorn, who famously didn't even have legislative staff because he just wanted comm staff. And more there's the incentive structure for Republicans to do that. We have Nancy Mace, whose entire life right now is predicated on getting as much airtime as humanly possible because she's being a bully to a new trans member of Congress for the crime of existing. So how do you view this as someone from an administration who left an opening for Republicans to fill a messaging void, only to then see, a Trump administration, the first go around, basically use anything as an excuse to beat their chests about even things that were like not accomplishments by any stretch of the imagination?
Yeah, I mean, sort of the Affordable Care Act example, I think, is instructive. I mean, there was just like a very long policymaking legislative process where Republicans were able to fearmonger and make up this nonsense about death panels, et cetera. And there was no bill yet, or even nothing had been passed.
Right.
So like people weren't feeling anything. And in fact, a lot of the ACA didn't kick into place until after the reelect, right? So it was putting good governance and an attempt at a process that was inclusive and could include Republicans ahead of the politics of it. In the long game, the ACA, Obamacare, is now very popular. A lot of people rely on it, and you're right. I mean, John McCain ultimately saved it. We'll see if Trump tries again. I think what Trump has been good at, for better or for worse, is just dominating the conversation every single day. He was doing his COVID press conferences. He was tweeting all the time. He was seen as such an aberration and so new and so shocking to people that it was like the early days of like Howard Stern, right?
Yeah.
The people who loved him would listen for 3 hours. The people who hated him would listen for 4 hours because they wanted to hear what he was going to say. I wonder if that's going to be the case this time. Like, I find myself exhausted by the guy.
Yeah.
I will follow him. I will cover him. I'll do my job. But it's like, it's not novel.
Right.
It's not exciting in any sense, in like a scary sense, but exciting in any sense. It's just, he's relentless. And he can talk about himself forever without stopping. Like I was listening to Joe Rogan talk about the Trump interview. He said Trump walked in, didn't use the bathroom, talked about himself for 3 hours, left, didn't use the bathroom again. Like this guy doesn't have to pee.
just fueled by an insatiable urge to keep talking about himself.
7,000 Diet Cokes later and nonstop talking. You don't have to pee once. You're a 70-something-year-old man. So I don't know how I got here, but that was a point about messaging, I think.
Well, look, we are heading into a holiday season now where there are going to be people, who are, families who are coming together now who have folks who voted for Trump and people who voted for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. How do you recommend people move into this period right now where we have to try to figure out how to coexist while, on one hand, not completely surrendering your values? And if people are mad at folks for ushering in a future that they don't want, should they capitulate? Or is it more important to, like, I'm just curious where you stand on this, on mending bonds versus like fighting back against what folks see as a wrong, especially as we head into the holiday season.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, look, I've never like had a family meal with someone who sits down and screams at me about a political thing. It's just like not how we roll. But I imagine it sucks. I think the thing we all got to remember with Trump is that we have to watch what he does more than we watch what he says. And so when he finally takes power in January, if they start separating families and doing mass deportations and causing real harm to people, that's when I think you start to have those conversations with people. I think this year, like, well, we'll see. I don't think anyone needs to capitulate or, like, genuflect in front of your MAGA uncle,
right,
but like you don't have to fight it out. Yeah, like we're about to see how this goes now.
Yeah, and I think that's the key more broadly too. Is a lot of people, when I do live streams and whatnot, people are asking like, will Trump do this? Will Trump do this? Will Trump do this? And we're unfortunately going to be in a period where we're going to have a lot of time to discuss and analyze every shitty thing that Trump is going to do. And I don't think we have to take this moment to imagine in advance what he's going to do, because we'll get there. And so try to save some semblance of sanity for a moment that actually warrants it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there is a part of me that's a little worried. Like there was so much energy and momentum and marches and rallies after the 2016 election. And you don't feel that energy right now. You just feel exhaustion. But I do think that could change if he starts doing some really heinous stuff. And unfortunately, I think that's what we're going to see.
Yeah, yeah. Tommy, where can people see and hear more from you?
If you want foreign policy, check out Pod Save the World or Pod Save America.
And I will put the links to both of those in the post description and the show notes. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'll throw them right here on the screen. Tommy, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, buddy.